By late October 1942, parts of Stalingrad stopped functioning as a battlefield. Streets were left empty in daylight, officers moved only undercover. Runners vanished mid-stride if they crossed open ground. It wasn't artillery, it wasn't air power. It was one man moving unseen through the ruins, shutting down entire sections of the city with a single rifle. Every countermeasure failed, so the Germans made one final decision: send their best marksmen to kill him. At 12 years old, Vasily Zaytsev learned to hunt from his grandfather, who warned him, "Aim steadily and meet your prey's eyes. From now on, you're no longer a child." In 1937, at the age of 22, he enlisted in the Soviet Navy and advanced to Chief Petty Officer. He was stationed in Vladivostok near the Chinese border, assigned clerical work far from the fighting, watching the war progress from behind a desk instead of through iron sights. When Germany violated the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in June 1941 and the Western Front collapsed, he volunteered to be sent into combat. Approval came only in mid-1942. Zaytsev was transferred to the 284th Rifle Division and put aboard a westbound train headed for the failing front. By September 1942, the division reached the eastern shore of the Volga. On the opposite bank stood the shattered remains of Stalingrad. Relentless bombing had torn apart factories and fuel depots, spreading thick sheets of burning oil across the river while artillery on the western bank pounded what little of the Soviet defenses still stood. On the night of September 22nd, Zaytsev division attempted the crossing. German guns fired with methodical precision, shells striking the water in measured patterns, as aircraft flew low and stitched the river with machine gun fire. Those who survived the crossing dragged themselves onto the ruined western bank, the ground still trembling beneath them. Orders were issued at once to push south toward Mamayev Kurgan and the Doji Ravine, where Soviet positions were barely holding. Only days after arriving, Zaytsev was hit in the leg by a bullet, sending him tumbling into the rubble. Before he could get back to his feet, a German soldier plunged a bayonet into his back. The blade struck bone and glanced away, missing anything vital by inches. Medics dragged him farther into the ruins, treated the injuries quickly and sent him straight back to the line. In Stalingrad, there was no rear area and no expectation of safety. Anyone still capable of gripping a weapon was forced forward again. He took a standard Mosin-Nagant rifle from a fallen infantryman and rejoined his unit as it pushed through the constantly shifting front of the industrial district. In early October, as the 284th advanced along the edge of the Doji Ravine, a German machine gun emplaced high on Mamayev Kurgan opened fire and pinned them down at once. Zaytsev lay among the others in a shallow depression of shattered stone. Between bursts, he judged the distance, long, roughly 600 meters, and saw the target appear only briefly. He aligned the Mosin-Nagant iron sights, let out breath, and fired. The gunner slumped over the weapon. A second German rushed forward to replace him and fell beside the first. A third soldier tried to bring the gun back into action. Zaytsev's third shot struck before it could fire again. News of the incident traveled fast along the line. The most important man to hear it was Colonel Nikolai Batyuk, known among the troops as Bulletproof Batyuk, for his habit of standing on the front line as often as they did. He immediately demanded to know who had fired the shots. When he learned that the shooter was a recently arrived rifleman from Vladivostok, Batyuk ordered the men reassigned to sniper duties. Broken factories, collapsed floors, and narrow corridors of the city formed natural concealment and choke points, places where a single well-positioned marksman could stop an entire attack. After months of fighting on an open steppe where German armor controlled every engagement, the ruins of Stalingrad finally shifted the advantage to the Red Army infantry. Soldiers began moving through the rubble on their own initiative, operating alone or in pairs and firing only when a critical target exposed itself. This improvised sniper movement spread rapidly through the 62nd Army. One of its earliest pioneers was Alexander Kalentiev. Within the 284th Rifle Division, he had already developed a reputation for treating the ruins like a hunter's ground. He had no formal sniper training, only a keen eye and a natural sense for terrain. Zaytsev encountered him during a short lull, when both men took shelter inside the same ruined building. For several days, whenever their units operated in the same sector, Zaytsev remained nearby. He observed Kalentiev selecting protected firing positions, vanishing behind wreckage, and synchronizing every movement within the rhythm of the battlefield. By early October, Zaytsev had already accumulated several dozen kills using a Mosin-Nagant without a scope. The growing count demonstrated that a single rifleman could influence the course of the fighting. On October 16th, Colonel Bulletproof Batyuk brought his newly assigned sniper to meet General Vasily Chuikov. The general gathered his officers for a brief field presentation, informal and hurried, among the ruins near Barricadi factory, where Zaytsev was awarded the Full Valor Medal. In the days that followed, Chuikov issued Zaytsev a carefully selected Mosin-Nagant model 1891-30 equipped with a PAM scope, among the most accurate sniper rifles available at the time, effective at ranges up to 800 meters. It proved so dependable that even some German snipers favored captured Soviet rifles over their own Mausers. With proper optics, Zaytsev's effectiveness rose dramatically. His numbers increased so rapidly and so steadily that his commanders recognized the need for more than a single sniper. Zaytsev was instructed to choose recruits and begin training others, following the methods Kalentiev had shown him. The group he organized later gained its own name, the Hares, or Rabbits, a reference to his surname which translates to hare in Russian. As his students gained confidence, Zaytsev's responsibilities widened. Using a trench periscope raised just above shattered masonry, he charted the German front line section by section, marking machine gun positions buried beneath debris, tripwires stretched across stairwells, and concealed routes prepared for night attacks. This intelligence was passed directly to the rifle companies holding the Volga's edge. On more than one occasion, the precision of his reports determined whether a position was overrun or successfully held. Zaytsev and his trainees had transformed the western bank into terrain where the enemy could never advance with certainty. German commanders were forced to slow their advance and eventually abandon attempts to drive the 62nd Army into the river. General Chuikov, aware that his troops were exhausted, understood that morale was as vital as ammunition. Zaytsev became the symbol he needed. Soviet propaganda moved fast. Radio Moscow announced his daily tallies in 22 different languages. Red Star published his methods as to their official doctrine. Rough flyers printed on worn presses in basements workshops spread his name through the ruins. For many soldiers, simply knowing that Zaytsev was somewhere in the rubble, watching the same ground they struggled to hold, became a source of strength in itself. The German response followed quickly. Reports from across the front described a new pattern of precise, deliberate fire from unfamiliar directions, delivered by shooters who never exposed themselves twice. These were trained Scharfschützen, armed with precision-scoped Mauser 98K, and deployed with a single mission, to counter the expanding Soviet sniper threat. One evening, a captured German revealed that Soviet fire, particularly Zaytsev's, had caused such disruption that higher command believed a specialist had to be sent specifically to hunt him. The first indication came the following morning, November 1st. Scouts observed German infantry moving toward a small spring on Mamayev Kurgan, a site visited at dawn to collect water. Two of Zaytsev's Hares moved to intercept. Before they reached cover, a single precise shot dropped one of them. Seconds later, another round punched cleanly through the second man's skull, missing his face by centimeters and leaving him unable to return fire. Accuracy like that ruled out chance. Whoever the shooter was, he was skilled, patient, and already stalking Zaytsev's men. The next day, Zaytsev selected Sergeant Nikolai Kulikov, one of his most capable trainees, to act as his partner. The first day passed in near silence as Zaytsev examined the ground through his scope. The second day brought no change. On the third, Battalion Commissar Danilov arrived to observe when a shot rang out. He collapsed instantly into a trench, wounded. Zaytsev saw no muzzle flash and no movement, only the strike of the round. Hours later, as he studied the terrain once again, his attention returned to a sheet of metal lying flat in no man's land. It had been there from the beginning, but now he noticed a slight disturbance in the soil beside it, something visible only to someone who had memorized every contour. He raised the decoy helmet above the trench. A bullet punched straight through it from exactly the angle he had anticipated. Convinced he had scored a hit, the German lifted his head for an instant. That was enough. That night, using scatter fighting as cover, Zaytsev and Kulikov crawled forward, lifted the sheet and found the sniper beneath it. Papers on the body identified him as Major König. His rifle was passed on to Colonel Batyuk. The confrontation between Zaytsev and the so-called Major Erwin König became one of the most famous sniper duels ever recorded. But when historians later reviewed the evidence, the story proved far more uncertain than the legend implied. No Major Erwin König appears anywhere in Wehrmacht records, nor could any senior sniper instructor from Berlin have reached Stalingrad within that narrow time frame. By then, the city was already encircled and German supply lines were breaking down. Still, the story originated inside Soviet lines. Colonel Batyuk was the first to name König, and the first to certify his identity. Soviet leadership was desperate for symbols that could inspire exhausted troops. A duel between the two elite marksmen fit the moment perfectly. Later research points to a different conclusion. The sniper Zaytsev faced was most likely Gefreiter Hermann Stoff of the 295th Infantry Division, already operating on Mamayev Kurgan and credited with more than 100 confirmed kills. Days after the duel, the larger battle entered an even more brutal stage. Temperatures dropped well below freezing, sealing rubble and bodies alike in jagged layer of ice. What the Wehrmacht now confronted was no longer Zaytsev alone, but nearly 30 trained marksmen operating throughout the sector. The Hares began expanding their reach, positioning themselves inside factories, workers' housing blocks, boiler rooms, and shutter stairwells. Each pair commanded its own strip of no man's land, forming overlapping fields of fire the enemy could neither anticipate nor chart. With these additional teams in place, German infantry discovered that once familiar routes had become deadly. Some teams pushed forward ahead of the infantry to monitor German assembly points. Others stayed behind to eliminate reinforcements attempting to seal breaches. Gradually, the German line lost the men who kept it operational, until entire engagements ground to a halt, units immobilized, without orders and without coordination. Between November 10th and December 17th, Zaytsev recorded 225 confirmed enemy casualties, including 11 German snipers, despite the deteriorating weather. His trainees, active across several sectors simultaneously, inflicted even heavier losses. As Stalingrad moved closer to encirclement, both Soviet documentation and surviving German accounts suggested that the Hares were responsible for more than 3,000 casualties. Even then, Zaytsev's role was not over. January 1943 signaled the disintegration of the German army. Encircled, freezing and starving, the remains of General Friedrich Paulus divisions fought on in thickening pockets as the Red Army pressed inward. Zaytsev stayed in the ruins until the closing weeks of the battle, guiding his Hares and scanning for the less German snipers who continued to pose a danger. During intense fighting near Barricadi factory, a mortar shell exploded close to his observation post. The blast threw him onto the frozen ground as shards of metal and concrete tore into his face. One fragment sliced across his brow, others pierced both his eyes. His comrades dragged him from the wreckage while additional rounds struck nearby. Nearly blinded and in intense pain, he was taken to the Volga embankment and ferried across the river under fire. Due to his value to Soviet command, Zaytsev was sent to Professor Vladimir Filatov, one of the nation's foremost eye specialists. Through a series of operations, Filatov restored enough of his eyesight for him to distinguish shapes and light once more, and in the days that followed, his vision gradually strengthened. By mid-February, Zaytsev could see clearly enough to return to the frontline service. He was promoted and awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union along with the Order of Lenin, in recognition of his service during some of the war's most brutal fighting. After recovering, he resumed combat duties and trained new snipers. Later, as the Red Army pushed west, he temporarily led a rifle regiment during the closing phase of the war. In April 1945, at the Battle of the Silo Heights, the final major German defensive barrier before Berlin, artillery shrapnel struck him severely enough to remove him from the front. The wound ended his opportunity to participate in the final assault on the capital. He passed away in 1991 at the age of 76, only 11 days before the Soviet Union formally dissolved. First buried in Kiev, he was reinterred in 2006 in Volgograd, the former Stalingrad, with full military honors, honoring his final request. His wartime tally is typically seated at approximately 242 confirmed enemy casualties, though some historians suggest the true number may have approached 400. Stalingrad was not saved by a miracle. Vasily Zaytsev did not win the battle alone. What he did was something more dangerous. The ruins no longer belonged to tanks or timetables. They belonged to men who could disappear after a single shot. The legend of the duel may be uncertain, the effect was not. Stalingrad didn't fall because the Red Army outgunned the Sixth Army, it held because the city itself became a weapon, and Zaytsev was the one who aimed it. On a different front, earlier in the war, Lyudmila Pavlichenko had already become a symbol of Soviet marksmanship. Fighting at Odessa and Sevastopol, she recorded more than 300 confirmed kills, proving that snipers were not specialists on the margins, but weapons that could shape entire battles. Zaytsev became the symbol inside Stalingrad. Pavlichenko became the symbol shown to the world. Different fronts, same message.